Hello everyone. Welcome to my channel, PEBC Drive.
In today's session, we are going to discuss about anatomy and physiology of brain stem. So let's begin with the anatomy of brain stem. The brain stem is the part of the brain between the spinal cord and diencephalon. It is made up of three structures. First is medulla oblongata, which is present at the base of brain stem. Superior to medulla, there is second structure, known as pons. And superior to pons there is midbrain. Including to these three structures, reticular formation also extends from the brain stem, which is net-like region of interspersed gray and white matter. Here, Image 1 shows sagittal section of brain, where you can see part of brain stem, below which there is spinal cord, and above that there is thalamus, which is part of diencephalon. Hence, brain stem forms base of the brain, which continues as spinal cord after passing from the whole foramen magnum. In Image 2, all three parts of brain stem are clearly seen. The lowest one is medulla, superior to that is pons, and superior to pons there is midbrain. Now, in this image, you can see reticular formation, which is extending from brain stem to cerebral cortex. Remember, due to its net-like structure, it is named as reticular formation. Furthermore, reticular formation maintains consciousness and sleep. Now, let's talk about very first part of brain stem, medulla. So, the medulla oblongata, or more simply the medulla, is continuous with the superior part of the spinal cord, and forms the inferior part of the brain stem. The medulla begins at the foramen magnum, and extends to the inferior border of the pons, a distance of about 3 centimeters. In Image 1, you can see that, just above the spinal cord, there is cervicomedullary junction, its foramen magnum. Above this junction there is medulla. In Image 2, medulla is clearly seen in green color, and below that, there is spinal cord. Now let's talk about tracts passing from medulla. The medulla's white matter contains all sensory and motor tracts that extend between the spinal cord and other parts of the brain. Remember, brain is mainly made up of neurons and neuroglia. The neurons, specifically those having myelin sheath, makes white matter. As myelin is white in color, the tissue looks white due to this myelin, and known as white matter. Coming back to white matter present in medulla, some of the white matter forms bulges, or knobs on the anterior aspect of the medulla. These knobs, called the pyramids, are formed by the large corticospinal tracts that pass from the cerebrum to the spinal cord. These corticospinal tracts control voluntary movements of the limbs and trunk. Here in Image 1, you can see the white matter, about which we are talking. Image 2 shows transverse section of medulla, where you can see the pyramidal structure in orange color, which is formed by neurons of corticospinal tract. In Image 3, the lateral corticospinal tract is shown, which is starting from spinal cord, and passing from medulla, to pons, midbrain and cerebral motor cortex. Just superior to the junction of the medulla with the spinal cord, 90% of the axons in the left pyramid cross to the right side, and 90% of the axons in the right pyramid cross to the left side. This crossing is called the decussation of pyramids and explains why each side of the brain controls voluntary movements on the opposite side of the body. In previous slide we have seen Image 2, where, just above the pyramid, there is crossover of neurons. This cross-sectional image of medulla gives the closer view to crossover of neurons, or more specifically, decussation of pyramids. Here we can see anterior corticospinal tract, which is not involved in crossover. and forms uncrossed pyramidal tract. Beside that, there is lateral corticospinal tract. The neurons of this tract cross over just superior to the pyramidal structure and forms decussation of pyramids. Moving on to the next structure. Just lateral to each pyramid, there is an oval-shaped swelling, called an olive. Within the olive, there is the inferior olivary nucleus, which receives input from the cerebral cortex, red nucleus of the midbrain, and spinal cord. Neurons of the inferior olivary nucleus extend their axons into the cerebellum, where they regulate the activity of cerebellar neurons. By influencing cerebellar neuron activity, the inferior olivary nucleus provides instructions. This information is used by cerebellum to make adjustments to muscle activity, as we learn new motor skills. Here, image 1 is posterior view of brain stem, which shows olive structure, just lateral to the pyramid. Looking in image 2, it shows pink-colored pyramidal structure, and just lateral to that, there is olive. And within the olive, there is inferior olivary nucleus. Remember, this inferior olivary nucleus contains three major components, which are primary olivary nucleus, medial accessory and dorsal accessory olivary nucleus. Adding to that, there is also superior olivary nucleus, which is present above inferior olivary nucleus. Now, let's move on to the nuclei present in the medulla. Remember, nuclei is plural form, singular is nucleus, and nucleus is cluster of neuronal cell bodies, present in the CNS. When this cluster is present outside the CNS, it's known as ganglion. So cluster of cell bodies in CNS is known as nucleus. And cluster of cell bodies present outside the CNS, or in PNs, is known as ganglion. Moving to medullary nuclei. The medulla also contains several nuclei. Some of these nuclei control vital body functions. Vital body functions are heart rate, pulse rate, and rate of respiration. Examples of nuclei in the medulla that regulate vital activities include the cardiovascular center and the medullary rhythmicity area. The cardiovascular center regulates the rate and force of the heartbeat, and the diameter of blood vessels. The medullary rhythmicity area of the respiratory center adjusts the basic rhythm of breathing. Now, in image 1 we can see baroreceptors present in arc of aorta and carotid sinus. Before moving to the function of cardiovascular centers, let's know exact location of baroreceptors in aorta. So, we already know that aorta is one of the major blood vessel of our body. For sake of understanding, aorta can be divided into 4 sections. First is aortic root, second is ascending aorta, third is aortic arc and fourth is descending aorta. Now focusing on the third one, which is arc of aorta, it is further divided in 3 branches. First one is brachiocephalic artery, which has 2 branches, right common carotid artery and right subclavian artery. Second is left common carotid artery and third is left subclavian artery. Now focusing on common carotid artery, both right and left, which further bifurcates in internal and external carotid artery. Just superior to this bifurcation, in the internal carotid artery, there is carotid sinus. So, baroreceptor is present in this carotid sinus, and also in arc of aorta. Now, moving back to image 1, to understand functions of cardiovascular centers present in medulla. As per normal physiology, blood pressure stretches the wall of the arc of aorta and carotid sinus, which stimulates the baroreceptors. Nerve impulses from the baroreceptors reaches to cardiovascular center via sensory glossopharyngeal nerve and vagus nerve. In response to that, cardiovascular centers will activate sympathetic or parasympathetic outflow to heart and spinal cord.
So, when blood pressure rises, it stretches the aorta and carotid artery, which is sensed by baroreceptors, present in carotid sinus, and aortic arch. In response, the basal rate of action potential generation is increased by baroreceptors, means more impulses are generated than regular. These impulses travel via sensory nerves to cardiovascular centers of medulla. These sensory nerves are sensory glossopharyngeal nerve, which is 9th cranial nerve, and sensory vagus nerve, which is 10th cranial nerve. In response to these impulses from sensory nerves, the cardiovascular centers of medulla increases parasympathetic flow to heart via motor vagus nerve, resulting in decrease in the heart rate. Also, baroreceptors decreases sympathetic stimulation to the heart, resulting in decreased heart rate and stroke volume. The vasomotor center present in medulla decreases sympathetic stimulation in the blood vessels, causes vasodilation. Hence, this vasodilation, decreased heart rate and decreased stroke volume, brings the blood pressure to normal. Now, when blood pressure decreases from the normal value, the action of medullary center would be opposite. That is, increase in sympathetic flow.
Now, moving on to image 2, which explains function of medullary rhythmicity area. So, as the name denotes, medullary rhythmicity area adjusts basic rhythm of breathing. Here, you can see, the medullary rhythmicity area contains inspiratory area and expiratory area, which ultimately controls our rhythm of breathing.
In forced breathing, the inspiratory area sends impulses to accessory inspiratory muscles, resulting in a more forceful inspiration. The inspiration area also activates the expiratory area during the expiration portion of the cycle. The expiratory area then sends impulses to expiration muscles, which consist of internal intercostals and abdominal muscles. These impulses cause the expiration muscles to contract, and this results in a forceful expiration.
Moving on to other nuclei present in medulla. So, besides regulating vitals, nuclei in the medulla also control reflexes for vomiting, swallowing, sneezing, coughing, and hiccuping. Stimulation of vomiting center of the medulla causes vomiting, which is the forcible expulsion of the contents of the upper gastrointestinal tract through the mouth. The deglutition center of the medulla promotes swallowing of a mass of food that has moved from the oral cavity of the mouth into the pharynx. Sneezing involves spasmodic contraction of breathing muscles that forcefully expel air through the nose and mouth. Coughing involves a long pinched and deep inhalation, and then a strong exhalation that suddenly sends a blast of air through the upper respiratory passages. Hiccuping is caused by spasmodic contractions of the diaphragm that ultimately result in the production of a sharp sound on inhalation. Moving on to the nuclei, which are present in posterior part of medulla. So, nuclei associated with sensations of touch, pressure, vibration, and proprioception are located in the posterior part of the medulla. These nuclei are gracile nucleus and cuneate nucleus, present in both right and left side. Here, in image you can see gracile and cuneate nucleus in medulla, which is receiving impulse from spinal cord. Specifically from gracile fasciculus and cuneate fasciculus of spinal cord. These impulses passes from medulla to medial lemniscus of midbrain, then to thalamus and reaches to somatosensory cortex. Now remember, somatosensory cortex is area of cerebrum, which is responsible for sensation of touch, pressure, vibration, and proprioception. Lastly, the medulla also contains nuclei that are components of sensory pathways for taste, hearing, and balance. The gustatory nucleus of the medulla is part of the gustatory pathway. From the tongue to the brain, it receives gustatory input from the taste buds of the tongue. The cochlear nuclei of the medulla are part of the auditory pathway from the inner ear to the brain. They receive auditory input from the cochlea of the inner ear. The vestibular nuclei of the medulla is component of the equilibrium pathway. From the inner ear to the brain, they receive sensory information from the inner ear. Finally, the medulla contains nuclei associated with 5 pairs of cranial nerves. Vestibulocochlear nerves, which is 8th cranial nerve. Glossopharyngeal nerves, which is 9th cranial nerve. Vagus nerves, which is 10th cranial nerve. Accessory nerves, which is 11th cranial nerve, and hypoglossal nerves. Here is inferior portion of brain, means when we see brain from downside. We can see here, in medulla, there are nuclei of vestibulocochlear nerve, glossopharyngeal nerves, vagus nerve, accessory nerve, and hypoglossal nerve. Now, let's have quick revision of what we have studied. So, the brain stem is the part of the brain between the spinal cord and the diencephalon. It consists of 3 structures, medulla, pons, and midbrain. Focusing on medulla, it is located superior to spinal cord and inferior to pons. Anterior aspect of medulla is pyramid, which is formed by corticospinal tract. It controls voluntary movements of limbs and trunk. Superior to the junction of medulla with spinal cord, there is crossover of neurons, known as decussation of pyramids, which probably explains why each side of the brain controls voluntary movements on the opposite side of the body. Now, just lateral to each pyramid, there is olive, containing inferior olivary nucleus. It regulates the activity of cerebellar neurons by providing instructions, which is used by cerebellum to make adjustments to muscle activity as we learn new motor skills. Next is nuclei for vital functions. So medulla contains cardiovascular centers, which regulates the rate and force of the heartbeat and the diameter of blood vessels. And rhythmicity area, which adjusts the basic rhythm of breathing. Medulla also controls reflexes of swallowing, vomiting, coughing, sneezing, and hiccuping. Talking about the posterior medullary nuclei, so, there is gracile and cuneate nucleus, which is associated with sensations of touch, pressure, vibration, and conscious awareness of position. Nuclei for sensory pathways, like taste, hearing, and balance are also present in medulla. At last, medulla has nuclei for cranial nerve number 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12.
Thank you for watching the video. Kindly like, share, and subscribe our channel.